Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Let's Talk About. This is our week-daily lunchtime presentation during the month of September to honor Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And right now, folks are coming into our Zoom room, and it's on Facebook Live on the Suicide Prevention page. And I'm going to start talking a little bit slower here for a second while I also share it to the NAMI Juno page. And we have closed captioning available in Zoom. So if you want closed captioning and you're watching this on Facebook, switch over to Zoom. You can get some captioning and join us here. And regardless of which platform you're on, if you type in a question, we will be able to see it and we'll be able to ask it of our guest presenter. And today's presenter is Meg Marsh. And Meg has a private practice here in Juneau. She works with youth and adolescents, is a therapist, has worked around the state, has a lot of interesting experience, including some like outdoorsy adventure, eco therapy stuff that we'll hear a little bit more about. And the idea for today is to talk about warning signs in youth, like what is worth paying attention to, what is worth acting on, and in general, how can a parent be informed about mental health so that they know how to raise their child with a little bit of a mental health framework? So Meg, thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Aaron. Really appreciate you guys joining me along for this awesome project you've put together for the community.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to have you here. Your expertise is invaluable. So let's just get started. What are some signs that parents should look for in their children? And what do those signs mean or what do they not mean?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think it's important when we start this discussion talking about, how to pay attention to signs and things like that. I wanted to kind of give some background on something that a lot of people might not have heard about yet, but I think is a really important concept to understand when we talk about kids and youth. And that is what we call positive childhood experiences. We talk a lot about ACEs, right? The adverse childhood experiences. There's a lot of great information out there on ACEs, great research being done, but we might not have heard a lot about what we call PCEs, or those positive childhood experiences. So I do have a little, a cool illustration that I want to share, and I'm going to attempt to share this since I don't do sharing on here very well. But I'm going to try to bring this up for you guys so you can have a visual to reference. And let me know if you see that.
Yep, this worked.
Awesome. It's kind of small, but I love this visual because it really helps us understand a little bit about PCEs. And this whole approach in this discussion that we're talking about today is really a wellness approach, right? How to support mental wellness in our youth. So this is a great place to start, I think. And I'll read the 7 PCEs that are on this illustration because it might be kind of hard to see. And then for people who are listening, so the first one is the ability to talk with family about feelings. That is something that is going to help shape mental health in adults that they've experienced in their childhood. The second one here is felt experience that family is supported in difficult times. The third one is enjoyment and participation in community traditions. It's another reason why I really love what you guys are doing with these talks, is really bringing the community into the youth lives that we have here in Juneau. The fourth one is feeling of belonging in high school. So getting kids ready to really have a good experience as they get older. And then the fifth one is feelings of being supported by friends. So that social aspect and being connected to our peers. The sixth one they have is having at least 2 non-parent adults who genuinely care. So this is connecting youth with trusting adults in the community that they can turn to as well as their caregivers. And then that last one says feeling safe and protected by an adult at home. So the caregiver role of being there for kids. And this was really great. I'm gonna switch it off here, but this was really great, I think, for just kind of showing how do we help support kids as they grow up in our communities, and not just looking at those warning signs or the things that are going wrong. And that was done, there's a study, a Johns Hopkins study, I think that this artist based that information on. So if people are interested, you can go search a little bit about that. But I think, it's helpful to remember this concept. I think a lot of us have heard this concept before, and I certainly know those of us in the outdoors who like to hike and explore have learned this firsthand. And that's that old saying that, a 1 degree shift can change your life, right? You might start off on 1 degree, but down the road a few miles, it's made a big impact. So I think that's important to start with first. But to the question of, some things that we should be paying attention to, it's really hard to answer what the, top 10 things you should be looking for are, because it's so different across different experiences, different diagnoses, different, external factors. But I think the big thing to remember is what is out of character for your particular youth. If you've got a kiddo who is really social, really bubbly, likes to talk a lot, and you start noticing that for that kid in particular, they're much quieter, maybe in class, or, through their distance learning, they're not showing up as much, or they're withdrawing to their room and they don't want to come out, and that becomes a pattern for them. That's something to start paying attention to. So it can be anything, persistent sadness, starting to demonstrate fears that they may not have had before, displaying aggression, like getting into frequent fights. And this is not a particular youth that's used to being in trouble or starting fights. And then remembering that all of these things could be age appropriate developmentally. They could not be anything and just a reaction to an external factor, but if it is really out of character and it is becoming a pattern, that's when you want to start noticing and paying attention to that pattern.
Okay, so you just gave us a lot of good information right off the bat. So let's start with the positive childhood experiences. Let's go back to that for 1 second. So I think even though it's like a charming graphic and it's got nice little drawings, this is something that is being paid attention to on a wide level. The school district has a survey called the Youth Risk Behavior Factor Survey, YRBS, Youth Risk Behavior Survey, something like that. And there's multiple things on there that are measured at the school district level. The 2 trusted adults is one big one. Feeling connected with peers, feeling supported by parents, being able to ask for help. That stuff is all on this survey. And there's a lot of school programming where it's either the stated or an underlying intention of the program to cultivate those positive childhood experiences. Like programs to introduce the youth to 2 non-parent adults who can be a trusted person in their life. The program's designed to foster connection between youth. There's teachers and coaches either doing it as a part of the program or on their own, just being a trusted person. So there's this nice web of PCE development, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's an okay term or not. That's going on, and there's formal thought behind this. So even though it's a charming graphic, it's also a very well-developed thing. And you mentioned that it comes from a Johns Hopkins study, so there's a lot of oomph behind it.
Yeah, and what they're saying with that's really important to take away is that, if these things are fostered in kids as they grow, they're building resiliency, and they're also learning how to seek and obtain help later. So even if, that's helping reduce symptoms even when mental illness is present, because they understand how to reach out. They've experienced that network before, and they've built resilience through these 7 important things.
Yeah, and teaching that help-seeking behavior in peacetime, before there's a crisis, just pays off so much down the line. When I was younger, I felt very uncomfortable asking for help. And it took me a lot longer than it otherwise could have for me to get help and ask for help. And even then, there were clumsy requests for help. And so just teaching a young person, particularly before they're in a crisis, sets them up much better. And I think the term resiliency is excellent and helps paint a good picture. And I also think, and I heard this from a union organizer like 10 years ago, that it's not just enough to oppose, but you have to provide an alternative. So it's not just enough to know that like adverse childhood experiences and trauma are bad. You need to know what to do. And so these like, there's a million ways to think about being a good parent and being a good adult in life. These certainly aren't all of them, but these are some specific things to pay attention to that foster good mental wellness in a young person.
I think it's also important because it helps caregivers remember you're not alone in all of this, right? That it really is important to build your support team and build your community network that can help you support your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to give this information to parents. They're going to have these ideas in their head that they need to have an open line of communication. Kids need to feel comfortable asking for help and feel supported. But it's not always going to be a perfect thing. And so then you started getting into some warning signs. And in a best case scenario, a young person is going to isolate themselves or withdraw a little bit for a couple days and then ask for help. That's not always going to be the case. So let's get into some of those warning signs and things to pay attention to. You gave some great examples, and ultimately you left us with, if anything is different, it's worth at least noticing and thinking about.
Right.
What would the next step be? Like, let's say I notice a 13-year-old that has withdrawn now for 2 months, and like how, if I'm a parent, how do I approach them? What do I say? Do I jump right to, are you depressed? Would a 13-year-old know what depression is? Like, how do you have that conversation?
Great. That's a great question. That's definitely the key piece, right? Is once you've noticed that something is concerning you or something's becoming a pattern, now what do I do? How do I talk to my kids? And I know that anyone who has teenagers specifically has probably run into that. I don't know how to ask without it becoming a major problem, and it doesn't go good places sometimes, right? And I think the important thing here with that approach, when you do approach, is to remember that, you know, questions aren't always connections. Oftentimes, questions cause more anxiety. And so for a kid who doesn't know how to answer those questions, it's pretty anxiety provoking to be asked them. So remembering how to connect, I think, is really key here. And that's where you want to provide some supportive statements rather than going straight to a question. It lets kids know that we're here, we're paying attention, we're very much involved and concerned about what's going on, but we want to also respect their space and being able to tell us how they need to tell us about what's happening for them. So, you know, avoiding questions, but bringing in something more like a supportive statement to let them know you're there, you're paying attention, you're ready to hear. So something like, you know, when kids were going to school face-to-face in person, showing up at home and the first question is, so how was school? Sometimes that's, so much happens, I don't even know how to answer this question. Where you might offer something like, hey, you look like you've had a long day. And then you wait to have that space of, I'm concerned, I'm paying attention, anything you want to tell me about. So that's a good way to start to approach, especially older kids. I have some other visuals that I can bring up just to kind of help steer that conversation, or tools that parents can use to have this conversation once you start talking about feelings or emotions or trying to pinpoint what's going on. So I'll share those real quick here again. And I've got one, I tried to get one that's good for little kids, one that's a little bit better for, you know, like your middle school age, and something that's more useful for high schoolers. So let me share this again with you guys. Let's see if it will let me pull this down so I can get to it here. So I don't know if you guys have seen Inside Out, but it's fantastic for kiddos and talking about feelings. And there's this great graphic that is out there that you can get a hold of. And it just says, how do you feel? And what it does is it breaks down those Inside Out characters from the film into emotions and gives a very simple word for each. So you have, you have joy, and you have sadness, fear, anger, disgust. But what this does is you've given your kiddo a tool to point at what they might be feeling, rather than trying to put some words to it right away. And then once they pinpoint which one they're identifying with, you can talk about those other words that are underneath as options to kind of pinpoint more clearly what they're feeling. So that's a really great one for littles. There's one here too for older kids, like middle school age, that kind of brings a lighter version to feelings. And so sometimes it's better to approach kids instead of starting right off on, are you mad? Are you angry? Are you sad? What's going on? To bring it in like something fun, right? Like this pizza wheel. So you've got, it's broken into, you know, pieces of pizza, and you can say like, well, let's talk about pizza, and, you know, which pepperoni do you feel like today? And this helps also give them words, but it's done in a way that is more light and not, you know, further questioning. You can even break this up and you can have these things up at home so that they're easy to get to when something's going on. And then for high schoolers, this one's great because it brings your body into it. It brings a little bit of awareness of sensations as well as your emotions. So this feeling wheel is a little harder to see since it's got smaller words on here, but in the very center, it breaks down into some pretty basic emotions like sadness, happiness, fear. And then in that quadrant, it gives you a little bit more clarity about what kind of happy you might be feeling. Are you curious? Are you just satisfied? And then on this outside here, it talks about what that might feel like in your body. So are there any sensations that you can relate to? Let me bring that down here. So that's a good way to like use tools when you're approaching, and it not just be face-to-face full-on questioning and try to investigate what's happening for your kids. But you know, children and adolescents crave to know that they matter, even if their words aren't always saying that. So I think just being able to join them in their play, that's how they express. If you've got little kids, join them in something they're doing and playing with, and that usually opens up a conversation for them to tell you what they're feeling. Go play basketball if that's your kid's thing, you know?
And so you use these tools? Like you'll sit down with a new or long-term young person that you're working with and bring this out, and they get used to like pointing to the spot on the pizza or identifying physical sensation on the wheel for teenagers.
Right. So what I might do, usually what I'm doing is I'm really involved in working with families as well, so that cohesive unit grows and there's more communication there, more space to be able to talk, right? So I might bring these out in a family session and do an activity around them together. So it's something that I'm introducing, but that I'm really sort of handing off to families to use as a tool. They worked really good for the littles because you can post it up in their room, post it up in a common area. You know, if they start to feel anxiety or feeling dysregulated, the tool's right there available for them to point at. For the older kids, like the teens that I work with, a lot of times we have this pasted on the front of their journal or their, you know, first page. And this is a way for them when they're journaling or trying to get their thoughts down, they have more tools to rely on, right?
That's great. And this seems to me, I'd like to know if this is true, that it would be helpful to review this before the big event. So if you're introducing this for the first time when a kid is yelling and screaming, it's my hunch is that it's not as effective as you review it on an average Tuesday afternoon, so that when the kicking and screaming time happens, there's already a routine about how to use the tool. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I mean, when a kid is dysregulated, it might be a distraction for a minute, you know, if you bring it out. But that dysregulation, it's really difficult to work through. So if you've got sort of your plan, the tools in place that you're going to, like any other thing that we prepare for, right? If you sort of know that this is how you operate and that tool is available, it's a lot easier to use it and work through what's going on.
Great. So we've talked about fostering positive childhood experiences. We talked about things to look for, behavior changes, and withdrawing new habits, losing old habits. Really, any change could be something worth paying attention to. We've talked about having a conversation, like these emotion wheels, these emotion tools are one thing to help aid in having a conversation. What else can a parent do? Like, who can a parent ask for advice from if they had a conversation and it still feels unsettled or incomplete? Like, what's the next step?
Right. So that's one of the other things that I think is so fantastic about these talks, right? We've really brought a lot of community agencies and resources to the forefront. And that's a great place to start. I often, will tell parents or caregivers, talk with educators. They spend time with your kids as well. They may have noticed something that's out of character at school. They oftentimes deal with some of these behaviors in classrooms. So they have great tools about how to manage or regulate. A lot of these tools actually come from teachers that, mental health and teachers work together to create them. So that's a great place to turn is your educators. Another is school counselors that are having these conversations with your kids and educating them. They may have tools already in place that they utilize at school. There's safe place, different things like that. Cognitive discipline kinds of stuff, conscious discipline. Those are great places to turn to. Your healthcare providers, if they've noticed anything different over time that you've been working with them, they often have great referral sources as well for resources in the community that they've connected to. And then reaching out to the resources that have been presented here. All of these community resources that's what we do, we help, right? So they love connecting with families and providing helping tools for caregivers to work with their kids. If you are, reaching out beyond that, or you've tried that and you've got some things, but you're feeling like these concerns are really pretty strong and I need some help, I need some professional help with mental health. A lot of these places can give you referrals to therapists. I know for myself and many therapists, we do free consultations. So, if you have some questions, you're not sure, like, oh, am I reaching out too soon? Is this really nothing? That's a great place to start, is to call 2 or 3 therapists and say, hey, can I do a free consult with you? I have some concerns. And for myself, with free consults, I also will talk with the kids too and see if that's a good fit for them if they want to move forward. But that way you don't feel like you're engaging in services before you're ready or if it's not the right fit.
And so if someone does start receiving services from you after one of those consults, what does youth outpatient therapy look like? Like, who's involved? How often does it happen? What is actually talked about? How does the whole thing work?
That's a great question. So usually for my process, there's that initial contact or a referral call. So I might spend 15 minutes or so with a caregiver trying to find out if my specific practice is going to meet that need. It might be that something is coming up in that conversation that there's someone in the community I know about that would be a better fit, that have more expertise in that area. So that's kind of the way that the phone call first starts. And then you might offer those free consults. So let's sit down. I think this might be a good fit. I think that, this practice might be able to help you. Let's sit down and meet each other, see if it's a good fit for the kid and see if it's a good fit for the caregiver and family. After that is when you get into scheduling your first session, right? Your first intake session. You fill out paperwork. Sometimes you can do that online, electronically, or in paper version, however the need fits. And you start collecting information about what it is the person is seeking services for. You get a little bit of the history. How long has this been going on? What concerns is this causing problems at home and school? Things like that. And then beyond that is whatever the treatment is recommended for. So you might have individual sessions where it's therapist and the client, the child or youth. You'll have family therapy if a therapist provides that. And sometimes you can have group therapy, which I think is fantastic. Really building that support network with peers who understand what's going on. They're struggling with something and they can relate. So a lot of folks in the community are doing some amazing groups right now. And I don't know if those have come up yet, but those are great resources for your kids too, if you feel like that might be an avenue to start versus full outpatient individual and family therapy. If not, oftentimes I also refer out. So I stay connected to the community. If it's something that I'm not going to be able to help with, generally you'll walk away with some recommendations or some referral sources from the therapist too.
It seems like the group ties back to the positive childhood experiences. There's one, I think it was number 5, friends that are supportive. So those are people who are peers who have the same language and same familiarity with talking about what's going on with them regarding their mental wellness, and that's awesome. So it's all comes full circle here.
Right.
I love it. So when somebody is getting that individual therapy with you, and maybe it's with a family, and maybe it's by themselves, is it talking the whole time? Is there movement? Are we playing games? Is it just like intense crying? Like, how does it?
What does
What's
it look like?
an average hour?
Yeah. So everyone is different, right? So every provider has their niche, but as for me, I really find that having this holistic approach, so you're involving the body, you're involving, if there's a spiritual practice, you're supporting that for the person as well. But what I do a lot is ecotherapy, wilderness therapy, adventure-based kinds of things. So we might do a walk and talk. COVID has put a wrench in things. So, I bring ecotherapy and wilderness in different ways, more creative ways now. But, you're really bringing together a systems approach. So evidence-based therapies, you're going to have talk therapy and things like that involved. But being able, especially with children and adolescents and families, is those interactions are what really move the therapy forward. So you find out what those interests are. Some might be art. So you're doing some, expressive art projects or nature-based things that really help the kid get motivated and find some enjoyment in the therapy that they're doing, even if it's hard work.
Sounds great. And if someone is interested in receiving services from you, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a website that is just getting going. So there's not a whole lot there, but it has some contact info, and I can certainly copy and paste some of this into the chat maybe, which could be helpful. But so I'm over at Maitri Alaska Wellness, and it's just how it sounds, like Maitri. Has a funny spelling, but I will copy this over here, and yeah, hopefully that will help people get in touch.
Perfect, thank you. And we'll copy that over to Facebook also. We have a question. What's one of the biggest differences between providing therapy for a child versus an adult?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it is for kids in adolescents. It's knowing their language, right? So things change developmentally. We're growing, our brains are changing. There's so much happening as you're growing up that slows down a little bit when you become an adult. A lot of things are similar. Those different things is really knowing where developmentally that child is and meeting them where they are. So the tricky thing is finding that out. There's kids who grow at all different ages and their grade doesn't tell you exactly where they are. It's getting to know that child, and then play is huge. This is how children and adolescents communicate. That's how we know what's happening for them, is the way they're communicating through their play. And like you said, as a teen, it could be the way I get things out is I go shoot hoops on the basketball court. So if you can engage in whatever that interest is, it's a lot more effective than, adults can do talk therapy a lot more easily than children and adolescents can. And then realizing how much their support networks really impact them. What's going on externally impacts all of us, but even more so. So I'm sure people have seen with COVID, you've seen that happening, right? With the reduction in social connections. It's pretty impactful for everyone, but it most certainly is for children and adolescents because that's where they are developmentally.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you have any other nuggets for us before we wrap up?
Just to know that your guys are doing a good job as caregivers. It's a hard job, you know, and I think it helps to know that you're not alone and you're not doing a terrible job because I think we are harder on ourselves than anyone else. So reach out. You know, we're all here to help. We want to create that supportive network and web around families and communities in Juneau, and feel good about that. Feel good about reaching out and getting help or just getting some tools.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meg.
Absolutely.
Meg Marsh, Maitri, Alaska Wellness, LLC. We'll put the contact info on Facebook. The rest of this week, tomorrow, we have a couple folks from AEYC talking about staying grounded in mindfulness and young children, with young children. Thursday, we have folks from AWARE talking about domestic violence prevention, and Friday we'll be talking about art therapy and giving some examples of art therapy directives that anyone can do on their own. Meg, thank you so much for being a part of this. You're an important piece of the safety net of people in Juneau, making it a happy, healthy, well place, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Everyone have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.